Today, we're talking about number 16, The Warning, the start of Cycle 4, the fourth Jake book. Let's see how this one does, shall we? Right, so it starts off. Jake is at his computer, and I believe Marco's there as well. And they find a website. For whatever reason, Jake thinks to himself, what happens if I search Yerk? Now, if this were the modern day, not Jeff Bezos, maybe, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey would see that, and they're Yerks, we know that for certain. They would see that, they would track down his computer, and they would Yerk him, and it'd all be over. But this is the 90s, so things aren't quite as easy as that. So Jake searches Yerk, and they find a website. And this website seems to be almost like an amateurish, conspiracy theory-ish-esque thing of people who claim to know what Yerks are. They've got little drawings of Hork-Bajir. They've got stuff that the Animorphs know is true, but also stuff that they think isn't quite true. So they're thinking, maybe this is some sort of resistance. They stumble into a little chat room and witness what people are saying. And it's quite funny because you see it in the book as it's typed out on the chat room. And you can only post like 10 words at a time. Wow, the internet has changed. Apart from Twitter, which allows you to post maybe 20 words at a time, but you get my point. The internet back then was very primitive. But they see all these users, and they all have different things to say. One of them is called Gump, and it seems to be a child who is worried about Yerks and wants to ask his, or I believe it's a lad, his father about what Yerks are, thinks his father's a controller. Obviously this is not good. But there's also, the Animorphs get together and they discuss, what do we do about this? And they find out that Web Access America is probably the best way to go about investigating this, because this could be big news, understandably. Once again, it's another one of these books where we're just straight into the story. We're not bothering with bloody parrots or dealing Dans or anything like that. So we're off to a good start. One of the funny things about these opening scenes is the part where they're looking through the known controllers section of the site. I think that by this point all the Animorphs have gathered round and are looking at this website. And it's the President, the Secretary of State or something along those lines, Snoop Dogg, the Spice Girls, Chapman. Yes, Chapman is an A-lister according to this universe. He's right up there alongside Snoop Dogg, the Spice Girls, and the fucking President. I get it. It was probably just a list of loads of names, and they picked out the specific A-list celebrities of the time, and they also saw Chapman. But the way it's written, it's almost like he's been grouped in by... He's alongside Snoop Dogg, the Spice Girls, and the President. There's Chapman. I just thought that was a funny little moment. I'm pretty sure that it wasn't quite like that. The Animorphs decide that they have to go to Web Access America, which requires a long journey, so they have to take a plane. So they go to an airport. Axe is as clueless as ever. We're starting to see this running gag being a little overused. Oh, shut up, phone. We've had it in the past couple of books, so like 13, 14, 15, where Axe just has no clue what people are talking about, and he just asks these ridiculous questions and nobody bothers to respond to him because what's the point? Yeah, it was funny the first couple of times, but 3, 4 books in a row of it happening, it's sort of like... we get it, he's culturally ridiculous and stupid. We don't really need to have it pointed out anymore, and I've been helpfully informed by the Animorphs Discord that this thing continues. I hope it's used sparingly, but from the evidence of the last few books, it's rather overdone. Now, there's a reason. What I normally don't do is have the previous book up here on the shelf for you to see in the display. There's a reason, there's a couple of reasons. I've got the escape up here. You remember in the last book, in the escape, where they're at the gardens, they're on the roller coaster, Marco and Jake. And Marco is saying, look, Jake, we've got all this stuff happening, but surely we won't change. We'll still be our old selves, won't we? What happens in book 16? Let's go to page 25. Jake says, I just want to get back to a life someday where I don't have to make decisions that might get people killed. Do you? Now Marco's smile was definitely of the mocking variety. You really think someday we can all go back to being regular kids? Do you think after being the leader of the Animorphs you can go back to being average Joe, or Joe average student? Yes, I do, I said forcefully. I meant it. Marco said dryly. And then he carries on and This is weird because Jake is saying what Marco said in the last book, and now Marco's just like, you keep believing that, mate. What? In the space of one book, Marco is just... that just seems inconsistently written to me. Last book, Marco was like, we can hold on to who we really are, can't we? This book, he's like, that's not going to happen. I don't give a shit. He probably does give a shit, but the way it's written, it's almost like he's just shrugging it off like, don't be stupid, we are going to change after this. It just... a bit of a change of character from the previous book, which is, again... not great writing. The Animorphs decide to morph fly is the best way to get... I forgot to turn this on again. There you go. Which colour's better? The lighter blue or the darker blue? I think that one's more accurate. Anyway, they morph fly and they find a child who's just crapped himself, and they take the nappy, or as the Americans call it, diaper. It's actually written as nappy in the English versions, but I imagine you Americans call it diaper. Take that and put it near the gates where they want to go. Now, I'm assuming that because they aren't paying for this, they're in the main lobby of the airport before you go through all the security checks. Mind you, this is pre-9/11. I was too young to know what airports were like at the time, but what's weird to me is that they morph fly, they find someone who's going through the gate, and then the next thing you know, they're walking into the plane. I could be wrong, because as I said, I was too young at the time, but don't you have to go through like several checks? Like you've got to have your baggage check before you go into those gates, but you go through the detectors, you go through boarding, you go into a whole different section of the airport and wait there for about 5 hours. And then you go through a series of corridors before you get onto your plane. The book just seems to skip that bit. Just right, we go through the gate and now we're on the plane. Plot convenience. Unless, like I said, airports were different back then. Maybe. Jake gets hit on the plane. He gets swatted as a fly. And this is quite a fearful moment for him, and he has an emotional reaction after the fact, which he talks to Cassie about, and Cassie does the normal Cassie thing, which is try to comfort him, but Jake thinks, right, I'm the leader. I should not be the one who's in emotional distress. I need to be strong and resolute, and I need to get past this, and I need to lead my team. Which, yes, for the most part, leaders have to be seen as the figurehead of what's going on. You can't be seen basically collapsing emotionally, figuratively, whatever you want to call it. Jake is right there. He is right. But this is where we start to see a strange occurrence in this book. And this is, again, where I bring back to number 15, in less of a negative light this time. In book 15, what was the message? The message was to face your fears. And you'll notice if you go back to that video, and I noticed after I made the video, I never came to a conclusion about that message. I never readdressed that message after about halfway through the video. And the reason was because the book didn't either. For the first, half to 2/3 of this book, there was the whole face your fear thing. And nothing ever came of it. The message was never dealt with. There was never sort of overcoming that fear moment, really. And the whole reason I didn't mention it is because I completely forgot about it because it was so inconsequential. And that's quite negative for this book. But the warning, number 16, it plays with the same message. And I'm thinking, hold on a minute. Have they just taken the message and just stretched it over these two books? Because Jake has this fear of, firstly, the fly morph, obviously, failing the team. His big fear is not being able to react according to how a leader, as he perceives it, should react. And it's clear from the way this book is written and the things he says that he is fearful. He has to overcome that fear. And the thing about the warning, it takes the message from 15 and it gives that climactic moment where he overcomes it. And we will get to that bit. So was it deliberate that the message from the escape is taken over into the warning and completed there? Maybe. But let's get back to the nonsense of this. They've done the plain thing. They're outside Web Access America. And Jake, boy, Mr. Oh, I'm going to be the leader here. What does he say when they're standing outside this building? Okay, that was exciting, but now we're here, I pointed out briskly. We have a job to do. Let's get on with it. Marco, what's the plan? Now, if I were on board a ship, say I was on board HMS Albion. It's a nice little model, that, by the way. That was the ship I was on. If I was sitting in the assembly area and we were going through a mission, we were talking through a plan, what was going on, what we were being deployed for. If the captain turns around and says, right, what's the plan? You'd be fucking like, what the fuck is going on here? You're supposed to be the man who knows what's going on. Jake, how dare you as a leader? This book is partly about you being a leader, turning around and just go, well, what's the plan then? That's your job. Fucking hell. Jesus, I know he's a kid, and I've mentioned this before. I'm judging him on a leader, but not expecting him to be a good leader, at least not until the end. So we're bound to get these moments. But when these moments come up, I'm going to point them out and say, this is not what a leader does. This is your job, Jake, and this is something that you need to address. And I'm hoping after this book, because I think he does learn a few things in this book, that he starts to address these issues in his own leadership. Continuing on to page 55, there's a couple of moments that sprang to my attention. The first part is a moment I found genuinely funny. Now, Animorphs doesn't have many genuinely funny moments. It tries, but I think as an adult, I see humour differently than as I would maybe as a kid. We stopped on the way at Taco Bell. It was cheap enough for us to afford, and it kind of lightened my mood a little when Axe went nuts and started sucking up packets of hot sauce. The manager kicked us out, and at that point, I had a little bit of a chuckle because that was a good little moment. I liked that. But there was something else on page 55 as well. And that is more plot convenience. Now remember in the airport, they just so happened to be overhearing these parents who said, right, our baby's fucking shat itself. We need to get rid of this diaper. Nice little convenient thing in there. What happens when they're standing outside the WAA building? There's a tour group just starting. Well, how convenient. Plot conveniences, plot conveniences, plot conveniences. And they're becoming rather too frequent in this series of books as we go on through. It's one of those things that just triggers me. It triggers me. They're in the Web Access America building and they're trying to figure out what to do because obviously Jake never thought of what he was going to do. Jake. They see this big control room where all these computers on and they say, right, that's our target. We'll get Axe and Marco in there because they're the computer whizzes. They can find out the information we need. They're sort of looking down. The way I read it, they're looking down at this big thing and they're in like a big window-walled area where the people in can look up and see them. And they're trying to come up with a plan. And I believe it was Rachel who says, well, why don't we just morph some of the people that work here and use that? And Cassie says, wow, there's something not really right about that. And they carry on talking. And later on she says, or Marco says, what's the big deal? Axe's human morph is made up of bits of DNA from all of us. What's the difference? Cassie says, we consented. We gave permission. Do you not remember, Cassie, in book 12, where you morph raped Rachel? You just said, give me your morph. I must have your DNA now. And she never gave permission. Cassie in this book is incredibly infuriating, and this is probably the first instance of it, where she's just, we always ask for permission. Except for that time I did. Jake makes a plan for a distraction, which involves him morphing Tiger, Rachel Grizzly, Cassie Skunk, and Tobias being Tobias. And they'll go around with mops cleaning a carpeted floor and grabbing everybody's attention to look up, allowing Marco and Axe to come in behind, do what they need to do. Now, I need to do a self-correction here, because there have been a few times in the past where I've bemoaned that tigers don't roar. And I have to correct myself, because I actually looked into this, and tigers do roar. So, yes, me with a master's in zoology didn't know that tigers roared. So, yes, criticise me all you want for that. My excuse is, they do not roar very frequently at all. They don't roar at prey, and they don't roar anywhere near as loud as lions do. It's they chuff more often than not. So, which is sort of what, if you watch the TV show, that's what Cassie said to do. But, so yeah, self-correction. I apologise. Axe and Marco find the information they need. They get out, because the guards are just like, we don't want to mess with these animals after Cassie skunk sprays them, because skunk is the most dangerous animal on the planet, as we found out. And they get out and they have a little confabulation. And it turns out that Marco was being chatted up by one of Chris Hansen's next victims. It was some 60-year-old git who works in a postal office, who's been like sending him a little, "Oh, how are you doing, sweetie?" You know, creepy. Yeah, you go watch Chris Hansen, he probably turned up on there somewhere. They're going back, they've got to take a plane back, and they decide to go and fly morph again, despite Jake being swatted earlier and the danger that came with that. And Cassie takes Jake aside, and they have a bit of a chat, and she's saying, you don't have to pretend to be strong. You can show your emotional weakness, which is incorrect as a leader. But the right thing happens here. She takes him aside, and he has his emotional moment with her and her alone, rather than expressing it to the wide world. So in a way, she's helped him to do the right thing. And he has some good lines about leadership on page 74. "No, you're usually right, Cassie, but this time you're wrong. See, if I give in to fear, then that gives everyone permission to give in to fear. And we all have good reasons to be afraid. Pretty soon we'd be totally paralysed. We wouldn't be able to do anything because one of us might have some good reason to be scared." Brilliant, Jake. That is it. That's the nail on the head. That's what I was saying earlier. That's part of your job as a leader, is to be I wouldn't say icon, but you've got to be an image of brilliance, essentially. Even if you may not be, you've got to portray yourself as, you should follow me because I know what we need to do and we will get this job done. And if you make it seem to your group that you're weak, they will think you're weak and they will lose confidence in you. And they will lose confidence in themselves. And that is what Jake is addressing here. And I thought it was brilliantly said. Cassie says, "We don't morph ants anymore because they scared all of us, but mostly Marco. We don't ever talk about morphing termites because of my problems with them. What's the difference?" Jake says, "The difference is you all decided I was the leader. That's the difference. A leader may be just as weak or scared or doubtful as anyone else, but he isn't allowed to show it. People say they want leaders to be just like them, but I don't think so. People want leaders to act the way people wish they could act themselves. Marco and Rachel and Tobias and Axe don't want me to give them permission to be scared. They want me to help them be brave." Partly right, partly not. I think what Cassie is allowing Jake to do here is to release the pressure, she's his pressure valve, basically. He's now delivering his emotions onto her, she's storing it rather than him giving it out to the team. You don't have to always be brave and whatever. There's a reason, like in the Navy, you have chaplaincies, religious people who don't talk about religion all the time. They allow people to come in and just spill their guts, essentially, just to relieve that pressure. And that's what Jake is using Cassie for right now. But at the same time, he doesn't want to project this onto his team. He doesn't want to appear that when he's in the leadership position. That's the one thing that Jake hasn't quite grasped yet. And I think that's what he grasps by the end of this book. You have to be the leader. You have to show yourself to be the one in charge. But at the same time, don't let that pressure build up. Find yourself an outlet. Everybody needs that outlet. Everybody. Don't think you're an exception. I'm talking to you. If you have pressure building up, you need to find yourself an outlet. There are plenty of people to talk to out there, always. But yeah, that little bit between Jake and Cassie was really good. I appreciated that bit, and again, I was appreciating Cassie, despite all the annoyances around this part from her. The Animorphs now have a decision to make, because they find out that Joe Bob Finestra, which is, I think, like the equivalent of Bill Gates or something in the Animorphs universe, they find out that he was one of the people, Fighty777, in this Yerk chat that they found in the first chapter. They also find out who this Gump child is, and they realise that he may tell his father at any point about the Yerks, and he may get infested and bad stuff happen. Cassie says, right, we need to save Gump first. Marco says, right, we've got to use this time that we have now to deal with Joe Bob Finestra and find out what's going on with him. Jake has a decision to make, and there's a few times in this book where everyone just turns to look at him. And he makes the right decision. He makes the right call. Cassie's was based on emotion. Marco's was based on logic. And that's those two characters acting like those two characters. That's fine. That's their character. Jake makes the right call. He says, right, we've got to go for our main target, our main priority here with the time that we have. So we go deal with Joe Bob Finestra, and then if we find time later, we'll deal with that Gump thing. Good stuff, Jake. Making the right choice and explaining why, essentially. Conveniently enough for the plot, the mansion is nearby, and I'm talking very nearby. Close enough that they can get to the gardens within half an hour. And Jake is ordering his team around this place, and he does some really good work delegating. Again, it's like in the last book, where he shows some pretty good leadership. He's delegating them, he's giving them orders, and they're clear, concise, to the point, and they know what they're doing. The problem was that there were things that he overlooked, which is understandable. That you can never know everything about your enemy. And unfortunately for Jake, as Rachel goes in, she gets hit by like a bug zap or something. And she collapses inside and she's unconscious. Disaster, essentially. But Rachel has been effectively captured. And then, I forget how... Oh, Axe gets shot because there's a bunch of security around this massive mansion. Because remember, Joe Bob Finestra is massively rich, so he's got this huge complex and buildings everywhere and security. He gets shot, he goes down, and a Rottweiler grabs him. Thankfully, he doesn't chomp down on him because the security are like, just hold. And the other four escape. And they're panicking, they're thinking, they really are panicking. Marco is starting to have a go at Jake. Tobias is just like, oh, what the fuck do we do? Cassie just being Cassie in the background. And Jake is having that fear moment. This is where the message from 15 comes into 16 and we start to get the conclusion of that little saga. Because Jake is suddenly feeling that fear of, right, everything is now on me. How do I deal with this? I may have just killed 2 of my team and I may cause the death of the rest of them. They're in a really tricky situation, and Jake is the one who they look to do something about this. And instead of just curling up into a ball and trying to find an excuse to get out of it, he sticks to it and he goes and does something despite his fear. And that is the overcoming of the fear conclusion, essentially, that we started in book 15, The Escape. You see now why I've got the escape up here. Goes to the gardens, which is conveniently close enough. And he gets onto a rhino, which is conveniently out of sight of everyone. Thankfully, I suppose not very convenient, because Tobias has to provide a distraction by stealing candy floss. But he demorphs on top of this rhino, who throws him off, but he's able conveniently to grab on a horn. The rhino stays there, and he acquires the horn. He acquires from the horn, he acquires the rhino. And they head back, and they just have just about enough time, and he morphs Rhino and barrages his way into the complex. Once inside, he don't really know what's going on. He's being guided by the other Animorphs. He's bashing things left, right and centre. He's getting shot, but as a Rhino, he's withstanding the damage pretty well. Get inside, can't find much. They feel like they've run out of time. They really feel like they've run out of time. Tobias goes off, finds where there's guards positioned. Or there are guards positioned, and they figure figure that's where we need to go. They demorph in this building, which seems very risky, but they feel like they've got no time, so understandable. What I did find funny was it took Jake about 10 minutes, well, it felt like that, to try thought speak. Eventually he thinks, stupid me, Axe, are you there? And Axe is just like, yeah, I'm over here. Why didn't you try that before? I suppose when you're in these tense scenarios, sometimes you forget easy things. It's easy to do, to forget. The amount of times where you'll see in the military, you have tasks set for you, training tasks essentially, to test you on how well you're doing as a leader. And they'll give you a scenario, they'll throw you in there and say, right, solve this problem. And people look for all these different ways of doing things, and they'll come up with a really convoluted plan, and they'll present it to the examiner, and they'll say, oh, why didn't you just do that? I remember that when I went in there, when I went for, I applied to get into the Navy, one of the first tests that I went through, we got this big chart. And there was a series of islands in the middle and a big route around the outside of all these islands. And you had somebody drowning over here. You had your ship over here and you wanted to rescue them, get them back to the hospital as soon as possible. I came up with this plan. I thought it was great. I presented it to the examiner and they said, well, you keep using this route around the outside that's notified. Why don't you just go through these series of islands? Simple. And I missed it because I just stuck to that route around the outside. I didn't think, oh, I'll just go through the middle and cut time in half. Sometimes you do miss the basic shit. That was a bit of a tangent, but it's just a point I wanted to make. They find where Axe and Rachel are kept. They're kept in biostasis by this Joe Bob Finestra character. And he's got like a miniature yerk pool in the centre of this place. And they're thinking, what the hell's going on here? He's got a Dracon beam. This guy's clearly a yerk. We're fucked. But then they figure, right, we're all Animorphs. He's fucked. And essentially they've got him prisoner at this point. It's just him with his little Dracon beam. He's just sort of strutting around. I'm picturing him as Bill Gates in my head. For whatever reason. And Jake is talking to this guy saying, right, we've got you cornered now. Let our friends go and we will let you live. It seems like a fair trade. But what they don't know is this backstory of this Joe Bob Finestra. It turns out he's the brother of Visser 3, Esplin 9466. It turns out when there's a double digit at the end, it means they're a twin, and there's usually a prime and a lesser. What that really means, I don't know, because that sort of implies that one's lesser or what have you, but later on they say, or Joe Bob Finestra says, sometimes twins will, or most of the time, twins will work together and share their successes, but my brother is a dick, and he didn't want to share any of his success with me. So this guy's obviously got a grudge against Visser 3, Visser 3 the opposite, but there's something that Joe Bob Finestra has that Visser 3 wants, and that's the ability to basically forego the Kandrona going back to the pool process. How Visser 3 doesn't figure out how this works himself or their scientists, I don't particularly know. Maybe it's just because his brother, Esplin 9466 Letter, is very smart. He must be very smart. So Joe Bob Finestra is able to hold Visser off simply by the fact that Visser 3 wants to find out what Joe Bob Finestra is doing. Seems fair. There was a funny line as well. I think it's on page 134. Finestra looked at me long and hard. I suppose I'll have to rely on Andalite honour, he said in a mocking tone. All right, my brother has not killed me because I have information he wants and needs. He doesn't want me dead. He wants me in his torture chamber aboard his blade ship. And I thought, how typical of Visser 3 to have a dedicated room on his blade ship to torture. This guy's just the most stereotypical villain, probably in all of fiction. He has a torture chamber. Why? I mean, usually you torture someone is a very, very rare thing if you want information. You don't need a fucking chamber. A torture chamber is something like you get in medieval times where it's just like you have a conveyor belt of people coming through that you're just thumb screwing just because you don't fucking like them. Visser 3 is a dick. Makes you wonder what sort of torture devices Vis 3's got. Has he got like the thumb screws, the chokey from Matilda, like a, I forgot, Iron Maiden, that's what it's called. And just, well, have a think. How would Vis 3 torture people? I'm sure we could all come up with some gruesome ideas. Makes them read the Communist Manifesto or something like that. I don't fucking know. That sounds like torture to me. And then we get to the part where Cassie is an idiot. Let's investigate, shall we? Joe Finestra is explaining how he extends his controller life, and he does it by eating other Yeerks. And Cassie shouts at him, "How are you getting the Yeerks from the human hosts?" And he implies that he kills them, and she goes mental. What better way to show to the Yeerks that you're a human than getting all wound up because humans are dying? Let's remember who the Andalites are. A bunch of dicks. They don't give a shit about the humans, let's be honest. They may give a little bit of a shit, but they're not going to start crying over a few humans getting killed by Yeerks here, there and everywhere. Or here, there and some small places, like a mansion. They don't care. So Cassie is just fucking losing her shit at the most inappropriate time, in the most inappropriate place. Shut up, Cassie. And then we get to the truly stunning part about Cassie. Right. Cassie is the moral upstanding part of the Animorphs group. She's the one with all the nice answers. The comforting answers. She's the one that values life so much that she will stick up for people and other creatures even when other priorities should override her decisions. She's always that voice of reason in the background, that voice of justice in the background. She advocates for the death penalty. Yes. Right, if you want context for this, let's look at page 138. That kid Gump, that kid who was worried about his dad, Cassie said, that lonely little kid, that's who this monster goes after, Jake. Not some abstract person with no face and no name. He'll wait until Gump does something stupid, till he confesses his fears to his controller father, and his father makes him a controller, then Finestra will go after them. What do you expect me to do? I asked her. You want me to get rid of this man because he's evil? Do you want to do it yourself, Cassie? Your morph would do it better, she said. You want me to get rid of him for you? I asked. That's what you want? Yeah, Cassie is basically saying, this guy's evil, we should kill him. You're just arguing for the death penalty, aren't you? That's what... Cassie, who the fuck are you? Who's this imposter? And not only is she saying, right, this guy's so evil that we have to end his life, basically advocating for the death penalty, she also says, you should do it.
I want blood, but you have to do it, Jake. You have to kill him, not me. You should do it.
But there's a quote in Game of Thrones. I believe it was Ned Stark, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it goes something like, whoever passes the sentence should swing the sword. It's all about honour. Cassie has no honour. I sentenced this man to death, but you do it for me. What a monumental bitch. Seriously, who is this character? Now, I get it. Rachel would usually be the character to do that. If that was Rachel who did that, I'd be like, yep, that's in Rachel's character. Just goes a bit mad and demands probably too much force. Whether it's the right decision, that's up to you as a reader. But Cassie, that's not Cassie's character. It's not. That's Rachel's character. Just because Rachel's in a cage and she can't be there to say those things doesn't mean you could just get another character to say it for her. That's a character break moment. Cassie would not advocate for the killing of prisoners. Because let's face it, Joe Bob Finestra is their prisoner at this point. We've established this. They're in control of this situation. And Cassie's just like, he needs to die. They escape the mansion with Rachel and Axe, and because they were in biostasis, they had plenty of time with which to demorph. They leave Joe Bob Finestra alive, as Jake promised that he would. And As I said, whether you agree with his decision to let him live, that's up to the reader. That's up to the reader, because it's not, as Jake says in this book, it's not an easy decision. It really is not. And if you think it is, then there's something wrong with you. Let's look at page 146. They're talking about making these decisions, and there's a really dark moment on page 146. They're talking about Gump. So Cassie has been talking to Gump in her wolf morph at the school where he is. "What did you tell him?" Jake asked. "I told him I was a magic talking wolf," etc., etc. "I told that little boy not to trust his father." And that is a massive sentence in not only this book but the series. That is huge. That is huge. And I felt real sympathy for Cassie at this point. She's been up and down on the I like her spectrum today. She really has. But she's clearly emotional about this. And she says, "What a terrible thing for me to do. What a filthy, disgusting thing for me to do. It was the best you could do," I said. "It was all you could do. I guess it's hard to fight evil without doing some along the way." Now this ties back into the Joe Bob Finestra situation, where sometimes you have to make decisions that don't seem right, but are right. That's a huge part of this book. It really is. And it's also massive foreshadowing. Massive foreshadowing. Saying, "I guess it's hard to fight evil without doing some along the way." We've already seen Jake boil Yerks in book 6 in the hospital. And at the time they didn't really care about it because they didn't know anything about these Yerks. They still think, killing Yerks is a good thing. As I see later in the series, there's a lot more nuance in all of this. But the idea that there is not always a right decision is something that hasn't been explored too much in these books so far. But this one is where we see that foreshadowing, that sense of we will make decisions along this path that we, as ourselves, as a group, will not agree on. And things that may seem evil, but are for some greater good, or for something that's a little less evil, or more evil, or what have you. And we get some real nuance from this book, and it's beautifully done. And another reason why this is here, the escape, because the last line of this book is, it brings 15 and 16 together, because we had the part with Mark on the roller coaster in the last book talking about, will we ever be the same? We had it earlier in this book with Jake saying, I just want to go back to being normal. The last words of this book: "The 6 of us shoveled dirty hay, and Marco made dumb jokes, and Axe tried to eat a cowpat, and Rachel moaned about Cassie's pathetic taste in clothing, and we were us again. For now." And that is a really nice way to finish this book. It really is. Because this book is all about, as far as I know, it's about two things. Firstly, it's finishing off the message on the escape of overcoming your fear, but it's also about Jake being the leader in a war where he figures out that he will make decisions that are neither right nor wrong. That it's somewhere in between, and people will disagree with it in his own team. The perception of the Animorphs amongst people in the future will be tarnished. And there's a reason. When you read this book on the surface, you wonder, why is it called The Warning? It doesn't really seem to fit the book, but look at that message, that foreshadowing of, we are going to do some evil shit in the future. This book is The Warning. This book is them finding out we are going to end up doing stuff that we don't like, that will damage us and damage the people around us. This is The Warning. We get a little brief moment at the end of this book now, where it turns out that the mansion has been set ablaze, and we don't know who's done it. Jake says things like, "Oh, it could have been Visser 3, it could have been Cassie, it could have been me. We'll never know." And K.A. Applegate always says on Twitter and where have you, that if it's not in the books, it's up to the reader's imagination. So I imagine it was probably Antifa mistakenly think it was a local minority-owned small business. Seems reasonable. Right, so Jake's leadership. This is obviously a Jake book, so there's a lot of stuff in here. There is a lot of stuff in here. The mere fact that he has to ask Marco what his plan is when they're outside the WAA, the fact that he doesn't come up with a plan, they go on the plane without any real plan. He scores really low for all that shit. But the delegation around the mansion, when they go there the first time, was really nice. He has some great words to Cassie about what being a leader is. That doesn't necessarily he's being a good leader, that's just him explaining what a leader should do. The fact that he overcame his fear to get the job done, it's a real mixed bag for him. And I can only go with a 5 because it is bang in the middle. It's ups and downs in this book. He almost gets himself killed with his stupid plan, but at the same time, he rescues the other team, bearing in mind that his plan at the end was just fucking gung-ho, charging there and to hell with the consequences. Not a great plan, but he had to do something. He had to do something, and he fought or something. It was pretty shoddily done, but it was something. It's verging on 4 or 5, but I'm going to give him a 5 for this one because there were some really good leadership moments in this book. So, sort of well done, Jake, for that one. You're there. The book itself. Again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's the usual plot conveniences which brought the escape down to an unstable 6 out of 10. But this one has some top moments. And I remember I was on the Animorphs Facebook page the other day. And somebody asked, well, what are the necessary books for this? What's the list of books without the filler thrown in? And people were saying, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, skipped 11, 12, and 14, and what have you. And they skipped 16. And I've just read this, and I thought, this is not filler. Far from it. This book is integral. Not for the Joe Bonfinestra stuff isn't. Not really. I don't think he's ever mentioned again. He might be mentioned, but he doesn't come into it anymore, really. But the subtle stuff in here is so important. There's a reason it's called The Warning. It's foreshadowing everything that's going to come in the future. And it builds Jake as a leader. It gives him perspective. It lets him overcome his fear of what the others are thinking of him. And they're putting pressure on him. And he's able to just march through that. This book is... It's an 8 or a 9. It has its flaws. And I've explained the flaws. The biggest one is probably Cassie acting completely out of character. But I think it really is integral. And it's got some brilliant moments in there. So I'm going to give it a low 9. A low 9. It's a good read as well. There are parts where it falls into the hard to read, but for the majority of it, it was nice. It had a nice flow to it. Yeah, sort of mid to low 9, bordering on 8, but yeah, 9. I think it's a great book, and it has some really key moments in here. And that last part, for now, we are ourselves for now. This is the warning to the Animorphs. That shit is going to get difficult. It really is. And that's the warning. Next book, The Underground. It's another Rachel book. And it's got a lovely little bat on the front. Isn't that wonderful? That's next week. If you are interested in more Animorphs content, I write fan fiction. This is number 55, The Interrogation. It's got a lovely little picture in the front there. Artwork by Char Reed, brilliant artist, does a lot of Animorphs stuff. The links to my fanfiction are in the description. Join the Animorphs Discord. We have a fitness club going. We're going to get fit together in 2021. We always talk Animorphs stuff, and we have a generally great time. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.